And joining me now, MS Now Washington correspondent and host of The Weekend Morning, Jackie Alemany. Jackie, it's great to see you, great to have you. So tell us, set the scene here, why the First Lady felt the need to make a speech, make remarks of this kind.
Antonia, that is a very good question that I think a lot of White House reporters are trying to figure out right now. I just pinged as many sources as possible to figure out what the impetus for this statement was. We know that it appeared on her schedule yesterday. It was billed in a very cryptic way. We weren't aware of what the contents of the statement would be, but it's a fairly remarkable statement, as we all just listened to, denying any connection to the things that Epstein did, acknowledging that there was an email that was released in the Epstein files, but that it didn't amount to an actual relationship, and then making a very extraordinary call at the end of her comments to allow the victims to have their day, have a public hearing, to call on Congress to provide the women who've been victimized by Epstein with this public hearing that is centered around the survivors, giving them an opportunity to testify under oath in front of Congress with the power of sworn testimony. This is a dramatically different message that we've been hearing from the rest of the White House, especially from her husband, who has privately and publicly essentially instructed people what amounts to a directive to move on from the issue. Pam Bondi, Trump's now former attorney general, who was ousted from her position last week, is now refusing to comply with a congressionally released subpoena to appear before Congress next week to provide testimony on what exactly happened with the administration's promise to release the Epstein files and why we still haven't seen the release of the full unredacted files. We also have seen a number of other subpoenas that are in the pipeline. Bill Gates is now set to commit to a transcribed interview in June. And again, there are a lot of question marks here, but you all heard Melania Trump, in her own words, come out and try to set the record straight.
Thank you, Jackie. And I'm going to bring into the conversation MS Now senior legal reporter Lisa Rubin. Lisa, help me understand. I just asked Jackie basically another version of this exact question about what motivated the First Lady to do this, to make a speech of this kind. It left me wondering, as someone who had very little time to prepare. We haven't known about this coming for days. You know, as Jackie mentioned, this was just put on her calendar yesterday. Is there not a possibility of a Streisand effect here, where for people who were not wondering about a connection between Melania Trump and Jeffrey Epstein, that now they are perhaps going to see that and now go look at for photos and images and rumors of the exact natures that she was describing?
You know, we don't even need to look for photos or images. The first thing that I was thinking about is there is an email in the files as produced by the Department of Justice, which is a note from Melania Trump to Ghislaine Maxwell that references the New York Magazine article in 2002 that is one of the first profiles of Jeffrey Epstein. It was written by Landon Thomas, who is a reporter that he became friends with, who later joined the New York Times. The files are replete with emails between Jeffrey Epstein and Landon Thomas at a later point in time. But the article at the time is infamous among those of us who cover Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell. Why? Because it's the article in which then friend of Epstein, Donald Trump, is interviewed by Landon Thomas and says, Epstein has quite a social life. He enjoys beautiful women as much as I do, but many of them are on the younger side. It's that quote that has led to plenty of speculation about how much Donald Trump saw and knew about Jeffrey Epstein's activities and how close, in fact, the men were. Melania Trump today, Antonia, saying that email is, in fact, hers. Many people had wondered whether that was an email that came from someone else, whether it was falsified. Melania Trump today authenticating that email, essentially saying, we were acquaintances. This is not the sort of correspondence between close friends. I knew her socially, as people do in New York and Palm Beach. I would say people of a certain social set and circle know one another from their overlapping circles in New York and Palm Beach. But we don't know what precipitated this today. And of course, Melania Melania Trump closing out her press conference today by calling for something that marks a sharp departure from Trump administration policy, Department of Justice suggestions for the last several months, saying there should be a public hearing that is centered on the survivors in that story. What I hear in that is whatever Melania Trump thinks is coming on the horizon in terms of a future story, perhaps, about her, she wants to turn the page on that and focus on survivors. Certainly welcome news to survivors who have wanted to have one of those hearings. I have been hearing rumblings, for example, that the House Oversight Committee might conduct a field hearing in Palm Beach to do exactly that, to center the stories of women who were minor victims of Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell in Florida in the mid-2000s. But now you have Melania Trump, the First Lady, saying she would endorse something like that, and maybe even suggesting that rather than it coming from Congress, this is something that this White House, this Department of Justice would sponsor on its own, Antonia.
Jackie, is that question, what Lisa just raised there, the possibility here that the First Lady is trying to get ahead of something that we don't fully know about yet, is that what the White House core is trying to figure out on the ground right now?
That's exactly right, Antonia. It's literally something I just texted to our fellow colleagues, and it's something that we've seen in the past this White House do, or at least this president, when they are read through and are trying to preempt a story. For example, just I believe it was a month ago, Donald Trump took to Truth Social to criticize Maggie Haberman, referring to her in pretty vile, disrespectful terms on his Truth Social. But at the time, people didn't really understand the context and why he was taking that moment to criticize her, as she has been on book leave and hasn't had any recent pieces published on him for him to be critical of. As we found out yesterday, Maggie Haberman and Jonathan Swan published a pretty blockbuster play-by-play of reporting of what had happened and what went down in the Situation Room in the lead up to the war, to going to war with Iran. And so this is a White House. These are principals that sometimes do use their platform to try to get ahead of a story and to try to set the record straight. But we should be very clear, we are not aware of that in this moment. We're not sure what precipitated the First Lady giving this statement.
I'm going to bring into the conversation now as well MS Now congressional reporter Michael Schnell. Michael, I want to get your readout from Capitol Hill here, especially given the context. Jackie and Lisa both touched on this, that Bondi is, as of now, still refusing to testify under oath. Democrats demanding, they've been very, very eager to get honest answers, to have that opportunity to ask her a litany of questions. How do you read what the First Lady is doing here against the backdrop of everything else that's happening in Congress, against the backdrop, too, of the reality that Blanche just days ago said basically he wants to turn the page here? The DOJ wants to move on in a way from the Epstein story.
Yeah, I think, Antonia, it just underscores that this Epstein story has just been so omnipresent throughout Washington, and it has had such a lifetime and such a snowball here in the nation's capital. I mean, it was just in November where, after the House had held off on voting on the legislation to force the release of the Epstein files, it passed with all but one vote in the House and unanimously in the Senate, setting off what has been this domino effect both on Capitol Hill and in other areas and even outside the country, with the impacts that those files and this entire story has had. But I think this all brings back to the fact that there are two things. One thing in particular that the First Lady had mentioned, asking for public hearings with the victims. I mean, that is so significant. We're going to have to see if there is any follow through up on Capitol Hill. It's worth noting right now Republicans have the majority, which means that it would have to be a GOP-led effort to hold up that hearing. We're going to be out to sources to find out if there's any interest given this push by the First Lady, but also the fact that this comes and these comments come as it's still unclear if we're going to hear from former Attorney General Pam Bondi under oath, or rather if the Oversight Committee will, as part of the Epstein investigation. It was last month in March where 5 Republicans had joined with Democrats to issue that subpoena for Pam Bondi, which was a huge surprise and a huge moment in it of itself. And then after President Trump had announced last week that he would be removing Pam Bondi from her post, there's been this question of, well, will she or won't she show up for that deposition? It's scheduled for April 14th. We heard from the House Oversight Committee earlier this week that she won't be appearing on April 14th. 14th, it's because the DOJ, its understanding and analysis of the situation is that because Attorney General Pam Bondi is no longer the Attorney General, she no longer needs to show up per that subpoena. But that analysis has come under such scrutiny. We're hearing from Democrats who believe that because the motion to subpoena Pam Bondi was made for the Honorable Pam Bondi, but Republicans saying that the actual subpoena said the Attorney General, a lot of questions of if she will show up.
Lisa, you are one of the hardest working reporters on this story. I can see you doing the work to get in touch with people as we speak. Have you been able to hear from survivors? Have they had the chance to see the First Lady's remarks? Do you know how they're processing all this right now?
I don't. I have not talked to a survivor yet. I have reached out to various representatives of survivors. I can tell you that one of them, someone who runs an organization with which many of these survivors are affiliated, that has organized advocacy around it, said this caught her by as much surprise as it is catching us. But I want to situate this, Antonia, if I can, in the larger picture of what's going on in the Epstein investigation right now. Michael was just talking about the anticipated appearance of Pam Bondi on April 14th, which we now know is not going to happen on that date. But I think one thing that our viewers need to understand is nothing is supposed to happen before April 30th, when the next witness will be there. His name is Ted Waite. He was Ghislaine Maxwell's boyfriend between 2003, 2010. Whether there's any relationship between anticipation of that, we don't know.